Samson pulled the trigger of his custom gun. He felt the oh-so-familiar jolt that ran through his arm and pushed his body back slightly before automatically correcting himself and firing another round. It always seemed that time slowed down in any gun battle, and Samson wasn't sure if it was to help him aim and react or to study the facial features of the person or alien he was killing. Sometimes he knew they deserved the death he gave them, and other times he questioned his superiors as to whether shooting people and aliens that had surrendered or were running away was morally ethical. A bullet ricocheted off his armor and flung itself back towards where it came from, harmlessly landing in the dirt. Samson briefly turned his attention to the one sandy chitin-clad opponent that had stepped out of cover and quickly dispatched him before returning full focus to the ones that were not yet stupid enough to do so. 29,993. Samson had never known his parents, mostly because he knew he never had any. He was a super soldier and was supposedly able to withstand anything and come out victorious. He wasn't so sure about that. Sure, he was the top of the top, the pride and joy, and sometimes the poster boy for the organization that artificially made the super soldiers, but Samson had one critical flaw he never told anyone. He remembered every face, every name, and every fact he could about the people and aliens he killed. Samson found it ironic then that the killing machine he was built to be also served as the last vessel of remembrance that kept any of the 20,993 people and aliens alive. Make that 29,994. Samson found it hard to deal with sometimes. When he slept, he could see their faces and hear them talk, even if they had no mouths. They always asked the same question: why? Samson tried to tell them that he never had a choice, that he was no more human than a domesticated animal, that he was property. They never listened. They told him that he always had a choice, that no one had ever made him pull the trigger or thrust the knife, and that it was and always would be his fault. A grenade was thrown at Samson, and before it had barely even left the hand of the alien that had thrown it, he had shot it mid-air. Samson knew there were two behind that barricade, which would make 29,996. He also knew that there were 4 still remaining, protecting their homes that once were. One was to his left, probably the partner of the one that ran out before, and there were also 3 to his right, another couple and a straggler perhaps. The one on the left was easy enough. While they reloaded, he took the small window to throw one of his own grenades over the barricade that protected his target. The gore that followed and coated everything that wasn't hidden from the grenade's sight meant another one was down. 29,997. He didn't do the same to the other 3. He could have, but he wanted to see the faces of the aliens he was going to kill to get his count up to 30,000 while they were still alive. It was better to remember them by what they looked like in life than what they looked like in death. He stomped towards the barricade, gun raised and poised to shoot the second something came up. It was the female that surprisingly stood up first to confront him. While the aliens he was fighting were primarily female-driven, it was always the males who put their lives on the line to protect them. The male and the other member she was trying to protect must have been important to her. Time seemed to slow down again as she faced him with an outdated gun in her hands. He aimed at her head, sure of a quick death, and studied her face as she fired a shot at him. The bullet did nothing to him, and when he was sure he would remember, he pulled the trigger of his gun. 29,998. She fell quickly and clumped into herself behind the barricade out of view. Samson continued to advance toward the barricade, only a couple of meters away, before the male stood up with the gun the female had been using. It was obvious why the female had gone first. The male wasn't anything like the norm. He was stringy and short, with an obvious lack of muscle. It was obvious to Samson that it was difficult for him to stand, but the fire in what passed as his eyes told a different story. It was a shame that this fire only lasted for a brief moment before his brain now covered the dirt behind him. 29,999, one left before he would never have to kill again. He came around the barricade, gun raised to defend himself in case of any last-ditch effort by the remaining one, but quickly faltered upon seeing what it was. It was a child, one that couldn't have been more than 4 years old, and was almost certainly the reason the other two sacrificed themselves so willingly. The child did not look at him. It had covered its ears, shut its eyes, and was crouching low, leaning against the barricade. If he were to kill this child, then, sadly, it would not be the 1st or 100th. But something made him stop and stare. Was this really what he was made to do? Kill indiscriminately? Shouldn't he have been fighting wars, saving the helpless, and protecting the innocent, instead of doing mercenary work that he was forced to do by the company that made him? Samson had not realized it, but he had lowered his gun while thinking. The child had yet to acknowledge his presence, but the tears streaming out of its closed eyes suggested it knew exactly where he was. Samson thought about the voices and how they said he always had a choice. He had yet to see any way he had, but he had finally seen it, his choice in the matter, what he could do to fulfill everything he should have been made to do. He dropped his main gun and took off his helmet, exposing his fair complexion and bald head. He pulled out his pistol and examined it carefully. It had been a while since he had used it. He raised the gun to his head, silent tears creating rivers over his emotionless face as he recounted every kill he had ever gotten. 13,534 humans, 16,465 aliens, 19,628 who deserved to die, 10,371 who did not. Out of all his kills, his next one was going to be unique. It would be the first true monster he had ever killed. 30,000.